Hello, welcome. We've got a great panel today. I've got Angela Chiria-Kalugi, who's with EDF. We've got Jane Flagel, who's Market Development Policy Lead at Stripe, Climate and Frontier. Scott Henry, a partner at Longview Farms. Ali, who you just heard from, and then of course Annette Nazareth from the ICVCM, and Mark Kember from VCMI. So thank you all for being here. So I'm going to start with you, Annette, because you all have been toiling at this. You and I actually started together at COP26 with the Task Force for Scaling the Voluntary Carbon Markets. And now you all, of course, have done a ton of work to establish the principles for supply-side integrity, and how the principles announced today, I'd like to know, and I'm sure the audience would as well, the principles announced today by the U.S. government reinforce those efforts.
Well, thanks so much, Curtis, and it's such a pleasure to be here. With all the work that we've done since that time, this is just such a wonderful opportunity and a great day for all of us. So let me start by saying that the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market is an independent, nonprofit governance body for the voluntary carbon market. We welcome the U.S. government's announcement of high-integrity principles for voluntary carbon markets. The administration recognizes that high-integrity carbon markets can channel a significant amount of private capital to support the energy transition and combat climate change. We are in a climate emergency, and we need every tool in the box to meet the 1.5-degree target. It's therefore vital that there is a common global understanding of what high integrity looks like to build the trust that will follow companies to buy credits with confidence, as well as common standards that will enable the market to scale and maximize its impact. So we're delighted to see the U.S. government's supply-side principles that are so closely aligned with our core carbon principles, which established the first independent global benchmark for high-integrity carbon credits. The CCPs are 10 fundamental principles that ensure carbon credits make real, verifiable climate impact based on the latest science and best practice. High-integrity CCP labels will give assurance that credits fund reductions and removals that are permanent, measured robustly and conservatively, verified by independent experts, and come from projects that are additional. That is, they would not have gone ahead without the incentive of carbon credit revenues. The CCP label will also give assurance that credits bring benefits that support indigenous people and local communities. The CCPs raise the bar, ensuring that credits come from projects with robust social and environmental safeguards that also deliver positive, sustainable development impacts. Carbon crediting programs will only be able to issue CCP-labeled credits if they meet high standards of governance. These include providing comprehensive and transparent information on projects issuing CCP-labeled credits so people can understand their impact on emissions, society, and the environment. The biggest carbon crediting programs in the markets have already updated their procedures to comply with the rigorous CCP criteria, and the first high-integrity CCP-labeled credits will be available to buyers later this year. While companies' first priority must always be to make rapid cuts in their own emissions, buying high-integrity credits allows them to go further and take responsibility today for emissions that they cannot yet cut. Evidence shows that this spurs on their efforts to decarbonize their operations and supply chain. The U.S. government announcement is a very powerful endorsement of the high-integrity principles enshrined in the CCPs. It sends a strong signal to project developers, to corporate buyers, and other governments and regulators. It follows similar support from the UK government, ISDA, the CFTC, and the Monetary Authority of Singapore. Finally, today's announcement will help launch a new chapter for the voluntary carbon market. The CCP label will shape the future development of the market. It will unlock private sector finance at scale for projects to reduce and remove billions of tons of emissions that would not otherwise have been possible. And it will channel climate finance to countries in the global south, helping them achieve their national climate goals. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annette. You know, what's great about this panel is we do have the whole value chain here. And so turning to you, Mark Kember, I'm going to ask you the same question. We like to think of ICVCM as the supply side integrity, and of course VCMI has been working tirelessly on the demand side integrity. So how do the principles that were announced today support your work, and how do you see it going in the future?
Yeah, thanks, Curtis, and thanks for the invitation here. First, let me just say I can only agree with everything that Annette has said. We are the supply and the demand side of the market, so one of the things that we've focused a lot on over the last few years is to make sure that we're joined up to give clarity to companies. VCMI, like ICVCM, is an independent organisation operating internationally, and we are the standard for the demand side of the market, looking specifically at two questions. When and under what circumstances can companies credibly make voluntary use of carbon credits? And secondly, what can they credibly say about that? And that's exactly what the principles announced by the US government this morning tried to do as well. And I'm delighted that the principles announced this morning and VCMI's claims code of practice are absolutely compatible with each other, as they are with the ICVCM CCPs. So I think one of the things that many of you and others around the world have been calling for, less fragmentation, more consistency and coherence, you're seeing that being embodied here this morning. And our claims code of practice does exactly what the secretaries this morning said, that the use of carbon credits must supplement action by companies to decarbonize. And there's evidence from many sources around the world that those companies that do use carbon credits responsibly are in fact those that are decarbonizing quicker, are investing more in future net zero aligned technologies and processes, and are governing their climate activities better. So our VCMI's claims code incorporates the work done by ICVCM, but also others, many of the initiatives that you'll know about, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, SBTI and others, so that we're providing one clear framework for companies to make those investments that go above and beyond. And we delivered our claims code on the back of an 18-month deliberative process, including stakeholders from all walks of society. Our country contact group includes representatives from over 60 governments, and we engage with NGOs, with the private sector, the financial services industry and others. Not everyone agrees on everything, but I think like the ICVCM process, the ability to bring people together and find common ground is what underpins the integrity and the strength of both of our respective initiatives. And as we've heard already, VCMI doesn't believe that voluntary carbon markets are a panacea. They're not going to solve all the world's problems. But at a moment where there are huge opportunities to reduce and remove emissions all around the world that are not being captured because the finance is not flowing, because companies are not confident at the moment of how to invest and where to invest with credibility, what we've heard this morning and what both our organizations do will give them that confidence. And a market that could grow from a rather paltry 1 or 2 billion now to perhaps $50 billion a year in 5 or 6 years' time, leveraging in turn perhaps another 250 billion through increased investment, the confidence that carbon credit finance can bring, can only be important in filling that huge climate finance and mitigation finance gap that we have. So that's why today's announcement is so important. It builds on the work that we've been doing. It gives us confidence to go further. But most importantly, it should give companies confidence that they can now invest in voluntary carbon markets within a framework that is based on integrity and trust, and they can build that scale. That's not to say that there will not be criticism, there will not be scrutiny. We need scrutiny. And Annette, as a former regulator, often says that transparency is exactly what we need. But those who are doing it right shouldn't fear transparency. They should embrace it, because that will raise investment. So thank you once again to the US government and all its representatives for announcements this morning. We will continue to work with you and with each other to drive this market on the basis of integrity and therefore reach its proper and true scale. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And absolutely. So, Ali, I'd invite you to share some reflections on this work. Obviously, for you all to step up and put out these principles, you had to rely on best practice in the market. So if you could tell us a little bit about how you all arrived to where you did today, and built on the work of ICVCM and VCMI and others, please.
Yeah, look, I think we were very keen to not start from zero base.
Right.
And in fact saw our role as lifting up threads that are in the fabric that's being woven by these international organizations, by the conversation that's happening here in the United States and around the world. And what you hear from us, I think, and hopefully is a signal to the private sector, is real areas both of concern, but also of, I think, enthusiasm that we do believe that there's an opportunity for this to be a way to go faster, for folks to invest in their value chains, for this to not be a CSR exercise, but rather integrated into core business functionality. And I think the other big thing is, in addition to building on these macro frameworks, we've also looked really on a sector by sector level at best practices. I think what you saw from Secretary Vilsack, the focus on agriculture, that's a place where there's been profound, I think, prolific work, including by our regulator, the CFTC. So I think looking sector by sector as well as the macro, and I think building in harmony and in tandem with that and lifting up the threads we think merit particular attention.
Thank you for that. Now we get to talk to the folks on the ground who are actually doing this work. So Scott, I'll turn to you. I know that Longview Farms have been engaging in climate smart agricultural practices for a while. Tell us a little bit about how you see these issues from a farmer perspective and what needs to happen for them to be more widely adopted within your sector.
Yeah, farmers and ranchers are on the forefront of all of this, right? We're the first environmentalists. We take care of the land, and to do so not only is good for the environment, but it's good for our pocketbook. Let's call a spade. But I think one of the statistics that recently came out from Farm Journal's Trust in Food was 93% of farmers are aware of these programs, but only 3% are actually participating in them. And you look at the question then is, well, why is that? Why are we struggling to get the people with the boots on the ground to participate in that? And moments like this are taking another step forward. I think the biggest piece is there's a lack of clarity and commitment to long-term contracts that many farmers have concerns about. And so providing further clarity is a big step in answering some questions. There's also still a struggle, I think, if we're being honest, around additionality versus historical beneficial practices that have been in use, and how do we properly identify and support those that are like our farm, that have been doing this for many years and don't plan to change anything because we've been using cover crops. We've been using little or no tillage. And so for us at the farm, I think the voluntary element of this is very critical. There are concerns about being too prescriptive in bundling, and I know that there's many folks out there that are working to try and figure out how do we bring the credibility that has been so widely talked about this morning to giving comfort and confidence to farmers that we're willing to transact. We recently participated in our very first formal program. It was actually a carbon inset program with Nestle, focused again on practices that we have used over the last 12 months, or the last crop year, I should say, on our farm. And for us, that program was the first that we had confidence of saying, okay, we are willing to be transparent. It's not that we're hiding anything, but there's more the fear of, what happens. I don't want to be the poster child for carbon program fraud or selling a credit that's not real or not verified. And so for the farmers out there, I think that answering those questions, and I do think that this is a step forward in helping that. I personally don't think that we're all the way there, but you have to start somewhere. And so I credit the administration for being willing to take the first step. I credit Secretary Vilsack and his office for trying to, again, provide further clarity to many of us that are at the forefront of this. And I think that there's a lot of potential, especially when we think about models that are already out there, whether it be the GREET model in the future of sustainable aviation fuel. That has opportunities to dramatically transform our market, but also drive adoption and participation. And so I hope that those are just examples. There'll be many, many more benefits beyond that. And so the agriculture community, and I only speak for my farm and my family, but we are very excited to see further steps being made. We hope that continued support and continued emphasis will continue to be taking in the farmer's voice as they do that. But again, I think today is a great first step.
Thank you so much, Scott. So Jane, Stripe has been a real leader on the buying side. We want to hear from you all. You all helped form this buyers coalition called Frontier, which is really about scaling high quality carbon removals, which we know are expensive, but with more purchasing over time, costs come down. Tell us about the commitment of your firm as well as to your work with Frontier, because this is an exciting area.
Thank you so much. I am probably less on the ground than Scott is, but I want to pull back a bit and talk about how we at Stripe and Frontier think about scaling permanent carbon removal solutions, both within and beyond the voluntary market, and why we're so excited about today's announcements, which we think help to tackle head-on one of the central challenges for innovation in permanent carbon removal, which is the lack of demand, the lack of customers for these technologies. So Frontier is a more than $1 billion advanced market commitment to buy permanent, which in our view is 1,000 years or more, carbon removal through 2030. And we were motivated by a few basic facts. The first is that the science is very clear that the world is going to need a lot of permanent carbon removal. 2, it is very expensive and very nascent today. And 3, a major barrier for catalyzing innovation in these technologies and approaches is this issue of a lack of customers. So Frontier is a group of buyers who are voluntarily buying carbon removal to get it on its best possible trajectory. We sign multi-year, multi-million-dollar offtake agreements with suppliers, not to maximize the volume of low-cost tons we can purchase today, but to enable learning to drive these technologies down the cost curve, a bit like what we've seen with other technologies like solar panels, for example. And the truth is that today, without voluntary commitments by companies to buy carbon removal, there would simply be no meaningful revenue for carbon removal suppliers, which means that they cannot start to build and scale their technologies. The principles released today underscore the value of this approach and the importance of catalyzing demand for high-quality carbon removal more generally, by clarifying that permanent carbon removal must make up a larger share of carbon credit purchases over time. And we should also be clear that companies and governments should be buying carbon removal today rather than hoping that it will just magically appear in a few short decades. This clarity is really important for enabling voluntary purchases, even though we're fully clear-eyed about the fact that voluntary action alone will not get carbon removal to climate-relevant scale. That will require policy. Today, though, there are no large public demand signals for permanent carbon removal, no large compliance markets, no direct purchasing programs at scale, there's some exciting announcements today, and no other incentives or frameworks to create demand for carbon removal, again, at the required scale. This can and will change, and in fact, it must if the world has any chance of meeting its climate goals. I just want to say a word about DOE's announcement today, which we're very excited about. They announced the semi-finalists for the Department of Energy's Carbon Removal Pilot Purchasing Prize, one of the first times in the world that a government has taken steps to directly procure high-quality carbon removal. We're super excited about this. The US government is leading not only in defining what good permanent carbon removal looks like, but also in experimenting with demand pull policies to catalyze innovation. The world needs a lot more of this, and we are super excited about the government's leadership here. And lastly, I'll just say a well-functioning ecosystem that encourages companies to buy permanent carbon removal, again, today, not at some unspecified date in the future, is fundamental to achieving our climate goals while public programs get off the ground. And today's announcements go a long way toward helping us get on that trajectory.
Thank you so much, Jane. It's great to see that the work across the spectrum so far. Now, Angela, EDF has been working in this space for quite a long time. I've always admired their leadership. You all, especially in your developing of the LEAF Coalition, which really helped mobilize climate finance for tropical forest protection. How does everything that we've talked about today relate to what you see happening around the world? And what does this mean overall for sustainable development and livelihood of people on the ground? Because we have to remember that this is hopefully going to be a global market, and emerging and developing economies are an important component. So tell us a little bit about your reflections on that.
Thank you very much. And first of all, I must say that we're very excited by this announcement today, because it is bringing the much needed clarity and the necessary signals that will not only give the courage to the private sector to want to invest in the markets, but also to the other stakeholders, the farmers, the communities, that there is a sense of what is good, and we're all aligning on that. So EDF, as you say, has been working on markets for a long time. We have been advocating for high quality markets, working with Annette and Mark and others. But we've also been working with governments from India to China around putting in place robust frameworks to support the markets. We have also been working to develop legal frameworks that would, for carbon trading internationally, that would better protect the rights of those who are the heart of carbon mitigation. That is from forest dwellers in the Amazon to entrepreneurs in Kenya. Now, what we're seeing around the world now is a growing attention to the potential of markets. I think the realization that climate action is going to cost, and we need more tools in the toolbox to be able to meet the investments that are needed. And we see, especially in Africa, where at the highest level of governments, we're hearing a lot of encouraging, should I say, words around how markets can actually be integrated within the sustainable development plans. So, for example, just in 2022, in sub-Saharan Africa, the carbon market investments grew by 70% to about 1.2 billion. And this only represents 16% of the global total, but it's a huge increase. Now, at the same time, we know that there have been concerns about the integrity and the governance of market activities and the adverse impacts that this could have on local communities. And this happens, of course, often where institutional frameworks are pretty weak. And that's why the alignment on what good looks like and clear guidance on high integrity markets is going to be essential to be able to address these concerns. So now, to meet the growing expectations, two things I just wanted to raise. One is the question of scale that Jane just mentioned, and the other is the question of building the necessary capacities to ensure inclusive participation. And I want to highlight the LEAF initiative, which is the lowering emissions by accelerating forest finance, which was launched in 2021. And it's a very unique partnership of the private sector, local communities, and other funding partners to leverage the power of markets towards protecting tropical forests. And I think it goes without saying that halting tropical deforestation should be one of the biggest priorities that we need to act on as soon as possible. But we know that attracting finance for this has been difficult. And LEAF has actually made this much easier. With some of the world's largest companies like Amazon and governments like the US government, who have collectively committed about 1.5 billion and growing in purchase pledges to source high quality credits from tropical forests. And what we're also seeing is that through the LEAF coalition, it's creating incentives to improve governance, to drive policy reforms, and large-scale implementation to drive, to tackle deforestation. Now, secondly, on the issue of capacity and inclusion, all too often, local communities, indigenous people, tend to be on the margins of these activities rather than being at the center of forest carbon design, participation, and revenue sharing. And this also goes for activities in other sectors, whether it is energy or but there are some bright spots, and as a complement to what we're doing in LEAF, we are engaged with a range of partners to try and meet these countries and these stakeholders where they are in designing technical support programs that, through partnerships with them, that respond to their needs and ensure that they become equal-footed partners in the transactions, in the design of these projects, and most importantly, as custodians of the activities so that they're sustainable into the long term. And an important thing to mention there is that the ICVCM and VCMI too have embraced this within their principles to ensure that the partnership nature of markets is also reflected within the guidance that is going out to stakeholders. Now, you don't have to take this from me in terms of the successes and the big opportunities. So we have a couple of videos to share with you today where you can hear from some of our partners in Ghana and Costa Rica who have been engaged in trying to develop and put in place scaled up, inclusive carbon investments. Now, the first is going to be from Roseline Fosua-Ajay, who's the Climate Change Director in Ghana's Forestry Commission. She's also the National Red and Focal Point for Ghana and a member of the Art Trees Board of Directors. Now, to us, Roseline is basically a climate change rock star. She has successfully led the development of 2 jurisdictional programs to reduce commodity-driven deforestation and build ecosystem resilience. So let's take a look at that video.
A very good afternoon to everybody in the room from Accra. And thank you to the United States government for having Ghana at this meeting and for having myself also for such an important conversation on the value of high integrity voluntary carbon markets. For a country such as Ghana that has gone through 16 years of REDD+ readiness, building the necessary structures for safeguards, for MRV, for forest monitoring, and also defining a strategy on what we can do to address issues of deforestation and forest degradation. The conversation on carbon markets is very important, and particularly that on the voluntary carbon market, because in Ghana's NDCs, the forest sector is a key sector in there to achieve the targets that we want to achieve as a country. And within the NDCs, we have both conditional and unconditional targets. For all the different sectors, and not just for the forestry sector, the value of the private sector has been mentioned over and over again because climate finance is needed and is needed urgently. However, the speed of delivery of climate finance has not been what it is from the days of the $100 billion pledge. Therefore, markets have a big role to play in supporting countries such as Ghana that are working to address deforestation. However, the voluntary carbon market has been one that has been largely volatile, has been one that has also suffered a lot of backlash. But in recent times, and for a country like Ghana, using the jurisdictional approach we realize has been very helpful to define the parameters within which our markets should work, and by default, the voluntary carbon market as well. Going forward, we need the voluntary carbon markets to be respected and to be valued for what they are.
So our second video is from Costa Rica. Now, carbon markets, as has been said by almost everyone here, is a really important tool in the toolbox for climate action. And climate action doesn't occur in a vacuum. It occurs in communities. And so now we have a voice from one of those communities. This is Tatiana Martinez, who is from the Bribri indigenous group in eastern Costa Rica. And she's representing a community whose livelihood is intimately tied to the forests and at the forefront of nature and climate leadership in Costa Rica. And she's been frequently, advocating for the benefits of carbon credit. So now let's take a look at Tatiana's message.
Los mercados de carbono generan ingresos adicionales a las comunidades indígenas a través de la venta de carbono, además de financiar proyectos comunitarios de infraestructura para salud, para educación, entre otros que generan sostenibilidad a las comunidades, además de incentivar la conservación y gestión sostenible de los bosques que se alinean con las prácticas ancestrales, permiten el consentimiento informado, la distribución equitativa de beneficios, el monitoreo participativo y el respeto por los derechos de los pueblos indígenas.
Thank you. Will you all please join me in congratulating the panel on an excellent discussion?